There is a particular kind of silence that expensive clothing carries. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something that has already decided what it is. Most people never hear it. They walk into a store, they see a name on a label, and they reach for something they do not yet understand. This is not a failure of taste. It is a failure of attention. Watch closely enough, and you begin to notice a pattern. The man who buys a jacket because it appeared on someone else's body. The woman who selects a bag because it was visible in a room full of people she wanted to impress. There is nothing wrong with wanting. Wanting is human. But wanting without stillness produces a wardrobe that belongs to everyone and no one at the same time. A collection of borrowed signals, a language spoken fluently but without meaning. Designer clothing in its truest form was never about decoration. The people who built these houses, who stitched these names into history, were not thinking about what you would wear to be seen. They were thinking about structure, about the relationship between a body and the space it moves through, about how fabric, when cut with intention, changes not just the silhouette, but the posture. Not just the posture, but the thought behind the posture. This is what gets lost when the conversation begins and ends with a logo. There is a man, you have seen him, you may have been him, who wears a suit worth more than most people's monthly expenses, and yet something is slightly wrong. Not with the suit, with the relationship between the man and the suit. He is wearing it the way someone wears a costume, slightly self-conscious, slightly performing. The fabric is correct, the cut is correct. But the body inside has not yet arrived at the same understanding as the tailor who made it. This distance is visible, not loudly, not cruelly, but it is visible to anyone who has learned to look at the space between a person and what they are wearing. The first error is not a purchasing error, it is a perceptual one. People buy designer clothing before they have developed a relationship with quality. Before they have held enough fabric to understand the difference between weight and heaviness, between structure and stiffness, between quiet and empty. You cannot buy your way into this understanding. It has to be accumulated slowly, the way knowledge always is, through proximity, through patience, through the willingness to sit with something and let it teach you without asking it to perform. The second error follows naturally from the first. It is the error of scale, of proportion misread, of buying a piece that belongs to a different version of yourself, a larger version, a more theatrical version, a version that exists in the imagination but has not yet materialized in reality. A coat designed for a certain kind of presence does not automatically confer that presence. The presence must already exist in some embryonic form for the coat to recognize it and complete it. Otherwise, the coat simply hangs. Not poorly, not wrongly, but incompletely, like a sentence that ends before it finishes its thought. Proportion is not simply the relationship between your body and the garment. It is the relationship between the garment and your life. A man who lives quietly, who moves through the world in careful, deliberate steps, does not need volume, does not need drama, does not need fabric that announces itself before he enters the room. What he needs is precision, restraint, the kind of clothing that says nothing loudly and everything quietly. When the proportion is correct, when the garment belongs to the life it inhabits, there is no effort. The person and the clothing become a single, continuous thought. Most people mistake confidence for loudness, and so they reach for loudness, for the oversized silhouette that dominates, for the logo that speaks before the person does, for the color that insists on being noticed. And there is a moment, a brief, genuine moment, when this works, when the loudness and the desire for visibility align. But it is a short window, because loudness does not age. Loudness does not deepen. Loudness becomes noise, and noise becomes exhausting. and eventually even the person producing the noise grows tired of hearing it. The quieter garment survives. The coat with no visible branding, cut in a fabric that takes years to understand. The shirt that fits so precisely it looks effortless, though effortlessness of this kind requires exceptional effort to produce. These are the pieces that remain, that gather meaning over time, that become associated not with a purchase, but with a chapter, with a period of life, with a state of mind, with a version of yourself that you were growing toward when you first put them on. The third era is perhaps the most invisible, which makes it the most persistent. It is the era of buying for the image rather than for the object, of selecting a garment not because of what it is, but because of what photograph it will produce, because of how it will appear in a specific light, in a specific context, to a specific audience. This is not entirely dishonest. Humans have always dressed for audiences. The question is which audience? The audience of others or the audience of yourself? Because the garment you wear alone, at home, in the early morning, moving through a space where no one is watching, tells you exactly what you actually think of what you own, and more importantly, what you think of yourself when no one is measuring. A suit you would never wear unless someone was watching is not your suit. It is a prop. Beautifully made, perhaps. Correctly fitted, possibly. But it belongs to a performance, not to a life. And a life made entirely of performances is a particular kind of exhaustion. The people who dress with real authority, who occupy clothing the way they occupy their own bodies, are not performing for anyone. They are simply present, fully, quietly, without apology, and without announcement. The fourth era arrives in the moment of rationalization. The moment when the garment is slightly wrong, slightly too large, slightly the wrong color, slightly not quite the version of the piece that would have been perfect, but the purchase happens anyway. Because it is available. Because the waiting feels like losing. Because proximity to the right thing makes the almost right thing feel acceptable. And the almost right thing comes home, and it hangs there, and it is worn once, perhaps twice, and then it begins its slow migration toward the back of the wardrobe, where things go when they have been forgiven but not forgotten. This is where most designer wardrobes live. In the back. In the almost. In the collection of reasonable compromises that somehow never add up to anything unreasonable. Patience is not a virtue in the conventional sense. Not as a moral quality, not as a discipline to be admired. It is simply a practical tool. The person who waits for the right version of the right thing ends up with a wardrobe that functions as a single, coherent argument, every piece speaking to every other piece, every decision informed by the last. This kind of wardrobe does not require explanation. It does not require context. It simply exists, and in existing, it communicates everything necessary without saying a single word. The fifth era is the subtlest. It is the era of buying things that are expensive without understanding why they are expensive, without tracing the line from the price back to the decision that produced it. The fabric sourced from a specific region for a specific reason. The construction technique that requires a kind of time most production cannot afford. The cut that emerged from decades of iteration, of refinement, of one generation of tailors passing knowledge to the next like something sacred and practical at the same time. When you understand why something costs what it costs, you are no longer buying a price. You are buying a position in a long conversation between makers and wearers that began long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. This is the difference between ownership and possession. You can possess something without owning it. Owning requires understanding, requires the kind of attention that transforms an object from a thing into a relationship. A coat that you own, truly own, changes the way you stand. Not because you have decided to stand differently, but because the coat was designed for a certain posture, and your body, given enough time and proximity, begins to meet it. There is a particular kind of person who walks into a room and does not immediately reveal everything, who allows the room to come to them, who does not lean forward into the attention of others, but simply stands, composed, waiting for the moment when the room adjusts its own attention of its own accord. This person is not always the most expensively dressed, but they are always the most precisely dressed. There is no excess, no redundancy, nothing that exists without a reason. And this economy of choice, this refusal of the unnecessary, is what creates the silence around them. The kind of silence that quality carries. Most wardrobes are built from the outside in, from what is seen to what is meant, from the surface to the interior. This is the natural direction of attention, outward, visible, legible to strangers. But the wardrobes that last, that accumulate meaning rather than merely volume, are built from the inside out. From a clarity about what you actually are, what you are actually doing in the world, what kind of space you want your presence to occupy. The clothing follows. It always follows. It cannot lead unless you are willing to be led somewhere you did not choose to go. The stores are full of beautiful things. The world is full of beautiful things. This has never been the problem. The problem, if there is one, is the gap between the beautiful thing and the understanding necessary to inhabit it. Not to wear it, to inhabit it. There is a difference, quiet, absolute, and visible to anyone who has taken the time to learn where to look. And most people, given enough time, given enough patience, given enough willingness to sit with the question longer than the answer feels comfortable, most people do eventually learn. They return something they were certain about. They keep something they almost let go. They begin to hear the silence that quality carries, and when they do, the purchases slow down, the wardrobe contracts, and everything that remains means something. The room does not always notice, but it always knows.